Welcome to this episode of CEO Tradecraft. I'm your host, Jason Radisson. Today's conversation is with Rich Williams. He's a former CEO of Groupon. Rich joined just after Groupon turned down a $6 billion offer from Google. Then he helped take it public, and he spent the next 5 years turning Hypergrowth into a real company. Before that, he was Amazon.com's first global chief marketing officer. Rich and I go back almost 20 years. And in this episode, we get into one of the most underrated innovations in tech, the GM scaling model. Before Uber made it famous, Groupon pioneered the playbook, giving full P&L ownership to 500 local general managers and scaling faster than anyone else ever had. That model created a generation of operators spanning the globe. Many of them now run companies that you'd recognize. We'll get into how that system worked, why it eventually broke, and what it tells us about the future, especially in the age of AI, where thousands of autonomous agents may soon be reporting into a single line of accountability. We'll also talk about what Rich calls building the outer shell, how CEOs evolve from running teams to steering entire organizations, aligning investors, simplifying strategy, and making the hard calls when the answers aren't obvious. It's a masterclass in operating judgment from one of the leading innovators in global scaling. Let's get into it. Rich, welcome to the show. It's great to have you on.
Thanks, Jason. Great to be here.
Well, cool. So as you joined Groupon about 2011, jogging some old memories there. What was the situation like when you joined the company? You were at Amazon before that.
Yeah, I was at Amazon before that. Had a cool job at Amazon, doing some really interesting things. And boy, it was just a cold shower difference between where Groupon was and what I experienced at Amazon. But frankly, that was a big part of why I joined Groupon at that time. I'd known a lot of folks there. I could tell from my conversations with them that it was just a hot mess. Anything that grows that fast, I think in the first year they did maybe $14 million, the next year was 300. And on a path to, I think, 1.6 billion or something like that in that stretch. There's just no version of that that's anything other than a hot mess. And that is not Amazon. Amazon was not a hot mess in 2008 or 2010 or 2011. And I just strangely attracted to those kinds of environments because there's just a lot of challenge in them. There's just an incredible opportunity for learning. And I could see all of that, but in a situation where it was surrounded by incredibly high quality people. So it wasn't a hot mess because the people weren't good. It was just a hot mess because you were strapping on your seatbelts and trying to keep up with just this stratospheric levels of growth, which is just hard. And I'd been there before. I've been in that kind of growth environment before. I loved it. I thrive in it. And I saw that opportunity, but just at an even different level of scale in Groupon in those early days. So yeah, it was really messy. It was an environment where folks had a lot of ownership, a lot of drive and mission orientation, but it was an environment that if you just even think practically, especially in that time period, from 2009 through 2011, it's not like you have the tooling that you have today. And so to grow that quickly during that kind of time, it was throwing bodies at problems. So you just had armies of people working against things. You had incredible hiring machines. And with that, you had a lack of process, a lack of controls, a lack of controllables, and all kinds of other things. And for me, again, that looked fun. It looked like it was going to be a fun problem to solve, and it was either going to be a solid success or it was going to be a brutal failure. And for me, at that stage in my career, especially, that was exactly the kind of thing I was looking for.
Yeah. The team at the time, the leadership team was Andy Mason, probably, right? The founder.
Yep.
Lefkowski, and then the Samwers, probably all of our Samwer, if memory serves, right?
Yeah, Samwers brothers were both there.
Yeah, they were both there. Was that effective? Like, what was that dynamic like at that time?
It was definitely, we'll put it this way. It had some effective pieces to it. And if you were to maybe abstract from it or pull back from it, you'd see this collection of skills. Mm-hmm. Andrew was really an amazing product thinker, very insightful, very thoughtful, deeply committed to customer experience and differentiation. And that actually worked really well with Eric, especially in the early days, because Eric is a super driven, get stuff done as fast as humanly possible, and bend the rules to his will level of thinker on just execution operationally. And so that actually worked pretty well. And I think the challenge was really the Samwers are very similar to Eric. In that, I mean, they're incredible operators in so many ways, and they're some of the best in the world at rapid scaling, like true hyper scaling. I think they're some of the best in the world. Part of it is how they build teams. Part of it is just their mindset is so crazy focused and driven. And that in concept looked pretty good. Like you'd have a lot of that, you'd have some real product and customer driven thinking, and then you'd have this, this execution and operational machine mindset. The challenge was it was basically, when you start mixing Eric and Mark and Ollie, you basically have unstoppable force and immovable object challenges where they're right. Almost too similar and not accustomed, none of those guys are accustomed to power dynamics that are challenging. Right, they're much more accustomed to being in the driver's seat, and that really was clearly Eric. Eric is a founder, co-founder at Groupon, largest shareholder, the acquirer of City Deal, guy with the bigger plane. And I say that because that came up in multiple conversations. You and your bigger plane. It's just that level Amazing. Of ego, the clashes involved in that is just not conducive to doing things, actually doing things well and doing things quickly and in an aligned way. And so it had all the pieces to be really good, but it just didn't. It just didn't have the interpersonal dynamics, the ego management dynamics, and ultimately the goal alignment to really be successful.
Yeah, who would have thought that it would have turned into what sounds like issues at the private terminal?
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah.
It's
Do you think they
fun.
knew that getting into it? Do you think Andy Mason and Eric Lefkowski knew it getting into it with City Deals?
I really don't think so. I mean, they might tell you something different than that.
Yeah.
But having watched it up close and been a part of some of those conversations and just how antagonistic it was, I think there was a little bit, and probably there was some naivete around how much they would be able to control it. So I think there's a bit of, we kind of know we're getting into something a little messy, but again, that same ego drive of, but we got this, like we can control this. And I don't think they knew how challenging that would be.
Yeah.
And so that's the other benefit they had is they'd hired a really solid team in the U.S. behind Andrew in particular. There were just a lot of heavy hitters, folks that have done amazing things up until that point and have done amazing things after. Just a completely different level of competence and capacity there. And so that helped buffer it a lot. But there was still just a lot of, frankly, unnecessary noisiness that happened in those early days.
For sure. And there was, if I remember also, like the year that you joined was also the year that they turned down the $6 billion acquisition offer from Google and then IPO'd. I think it was within a year of your joining, they IPO'd. 12 plus billion, I think. So I think there was this initial like vindication, like, the company's worth twice what Google was offering, less than a year ago. On the flip side, there were a lot of challenges right after the IPO, I remember.
Yeah. And I mean, that was a great situation of you feel like a genius until you don't. But I think the reality was, this is when I think about the company, there was so many good things going on at that company and a level of execution that I think up until that point was really rare. And who created what, I don't know, but we definitely were executing that hyperscaling model like no one had seen at that point, really. At least not in that generation. I don't think anyone had seen anything like it.
Right.
There's a lot of great stuff happening, but those, if you're in it, and if you've even, especially for me, I think there was a handful of us that had operated, a bunch of us actually, that operated in public, environments. And so I think that was the biggest challenge, it wasn't really going public. It was when the company went public. Thinking about it now, I don't know how many 3-year-old companies, 2.5-year-old companies do you know that can even be ready to be like an actual functional operating public entity and be good at it. And I think that's just the internal systems and controls that are required to be an effective public company is just that's really difficult to assemble in 2.5 years when you're starting from zero. It's for a lot of companies, it takes more than 2.5 years when they've been an established operating company for a decade. And so I think it's really a timing challenge more than anything else, because there was a lot in there that wasn't really built for that kind of operating model moving forward. And I don't know, I think about it like it's a three-legged stool of speed, scalability, and sustainability. And I think our two legs that had gone, even before I joined and when I joined, were about speed and scalability, because we had this behemoth growing beneath us. And the sustainability part, really, that leg was gone. And you kind of need that to be a successful public company over any kind of horizon. Even if you look at it over a handful of quarters, if you don't have any sustainability in there, the bank's going to come calling eventually on that front, and you're just not going to have enough in the account to cash it. So
100%.
Yeah.
And so you guys then got into the hangover, as it were.
Yep.
Do you think that ultimately it's what technology wants? Is this, the world is going to have hyperscaling because there's always going to be a land grab every time there's this new incredible product market fit, and we all know what happens when you get to monopoly, sort of levels. Is this just what we do in tech? And we maybe have a hiatus right now, or maybe don't if you look at what's playing out in foundational models. But
Right.
What are your thoughts? Was Groupon just one of the first examples of it, and there's much more to come?
Yeah, I think it's a first and a very public, visible example of it. It is kind of part and parcel to tech, and I think it's actually part of what makes tech exciting. And I don't think we're done with that by any stretch, to your point. Like, look at what's going on in the AI space. And even with the last couple of weeks, the discussion of who has the Kleenex advantage in the space. And there's some consumer brand advantage with OpenAI and on and on. People rush for that like crazy when they see that opportunity. And I think people understand how fickle our consuming publics can be, whether those consumers are enterprises or actual just people. So I think there is a natural drive for it. And I do think we're almost set up for more of that growth at any cost kind of environment, given where the tool set's going. It's, if you go back to the period of Groupon even, there's a lot of chatter about how much easier AWS and the cloud makes going quickly. And then now you move forward and say, geez, Replit for crying out loud. I mean, you can prototype within 20 minutes these days. And so the tool set enables a level of rapidity, and within that, it'll enable a certain level of competition that lends itself to just trying to win and be that, generate that first mover advantage, lock up as much of the beachheads as you can. So I don't think we're out of that zone at all, as much as my hope is that we learn some of the lessons from the previous generations that have gone through this process, which I think companies that, even if you're going to go crazy for the beachhead, doing it with sustainability in mind, doing it to build a great business over time, because it's hard to wedge that stuff in later. It's especially hard to wedge it in the bigger the company is, to all of a sudden get to a point of discipline, which everyone eventually has to get to. It's just it's much easier to build some of that operating discipline, frugality, repeatability. It's just not that hard to do. And so I think, I'm hopeful that as we continue to see the great races run and the next ones that'll be run, I hope that people are doing it in a way that can eventually be sustainable. So you don't have these big pop and drops operationally. You don't have massive disruptions with people, et cetera.
Right. It's a lot easier if you engineer it in the beginning than trying to retrofit structure on
it is.
Crazy,
it's so much easier.
Hyperscaling.
It's just so much easier.
Yeah.
I think especially today, it's like the tooling, which will only continue to get better, to instrument a business properly from the beginning doesn't take very much. It's just even having the proper tagging, the proper eventing. Like that stuff 20 years ago wasn't as trivial as it is now. Now it's pretty trivial. And so I think there's just some of those things, embedding data, embedding a certain amount of operational rigor. This stuff isn't rocket science.
Mm-hmm. You're largely credited with putting that structure in and straightening out Groupon and getting it set up for success as a public company. I know a big part of it my own experience being out there in the gig economy and scaling in other countries, once I started to get internationally into the ride sharing market and the food delivery market with Uber and then with 99 and then with Rappi, I couldn't help but notice everywhere we were running into Groupon people. They were, the city managers, the operations teams, a lot of how we were filling out our teams, how we were picking a lot of our country heads and our city heads was Groupon people. And then when we got into the operating levels, all kinds of talented people that had already been trained up. And I wonder, did you guys know how much of that was intentional? Was this, how did you get sort of into this model? How did you ultimately decide how to set up a country in Groupon?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot in there that I think the Samwers did brilliantly, by the way. Mm-hmm. We had a different version of it initially in the US, but it was fundamentally a similar model where it was really about forward deployment of resources and assets that had they had control. Like they had an ability to go really, really quickly, and they had a skill set that enabled them to do that with a high level of execution. And so it was very purposeful. The profiles of the people we hired, high capacity, high IQ, crazy work ethic, strong, usually consulting backgrounds or OR backgrounds, etc. I mean, there was a prototype of that role, and there was a basic model that they were deployed with. And then after that, it was single-threaded ownership. And so you had someone who knew that model and could be single-threaded. They had a certain amount of support infrastructure, so that they weren't inventing everything. But we also then gave them the opportunity to invent what they needed. And so it was just a certain kind of person that we looked for to do that, and it definitely was one that was rooted in a certain amount of operational rigor. I think that the challenge we ultimately had with a lot of that took a lot of cleanup later on was that a lot of our operational rigor was still manual. It was still highly dependent on people, and it wasn't as supported in automation and routine as you would like it to be. And from a systems perspective, it wasn't as supported. But we had a lot of really, really strong operational folks that knew how to build repeatable process. Our processes were just too manual in the early days, which we have ultimately had to solve with what you'd expect: technology, systems, and automation.
Yeah, I think you bring up an excellent point around kind of the rocket internet approach, if you could call it that. And there's a lot of Taylorism there. It's pretty top down. It's the Samwers have the reputation of sort of walking around the room and tapping people on the elbow and telling them to work harder. There's definitely that aspect. But it's extremely disciplined, and I think different from the Silicon Valley ethos, which is often, hey, if somebody had to do this manually twice, like why isn't the engineering team here automating that? And there's definitely automate or out kind of an ethos. So I don't know. What do you think it bodes for where work goes? And if by all accounts we're all going to be running teams of thousands of robots in a few years, what do you think it means for management and the CEO path? And are those Groupon skills helpful? What of it do you think we keep? What of it do we replace?
Yeah, I do think that skill set, that earlier stage Groupon skill set, is still really helpful because there's real value in just being able to lock in on what the inputs are and be ruthless in delivery against those and just execute. And I do think the reality is, for especially early stage companies, sometimes you just need to outwork everybody else. And having that mindset of the ability to be incredibly driven and focused on the inputs that ultimately drive the outcomes, and being willing to outwork other folks, that matters. I will bet on that for a long, long time. And I actually think where we're moving, and part of what's exciting about it is I actually think it provides almost it's not right to call it an unfair advantage, because that is a fairly earned advantage when you have that ability and that work capacity. I think you exacerbate that benefit. I think you really amplify it by having an ability to automate now and get leverage in an operation really fast. I think that's going to be where we see those unfair working or fair working advantages accelerate. If you're willing to put in the work, you have the ability to allocate resources and capital because you really understand the drivers of your business, and you apply that to a high automation mindset and an ability to do that rapidly. You're in a place where I will bet on those people all day. I do, however, think that there is a gap that would come if I were to look at maybe, I don't know, I'd probably say 2/3, 1/3 of our forward deployed folks, the early GMs, city folks, 2/3 of them were non-technical. Maybe a third of them had technical underpinnings, and whether that's, applied mathematics to engineering, various disciplines in engineering. I think that's where, on a forward look, if you don't bring any of that technical capacity to the table, you're going to be at a significant disadvantage, and you can be as ruthless an operator and as willing to work as you want, but you're going to be at, I think, a massive disadvantage, not understanding how systems work and how systems are designed. Will be one of those things it'll just slow you down in so many other ways, and people will have a compounding advantage on automation and scalability that will be really difficult to overcome if you're just a hard worker.
Yeah, we definitely in the gig economy also lean very heavily on the OR skill set. And I think, a glimpse into the future too for a lot of big public companies is, sort of the city team and even just the working environment of the city team. The city team, imagine for our listeners, 1 to 5 OR experts, generalists, good business sensibility, and that optimization, math, and systems training, running a billion-dollar business, potentially with 50,000 employees. And just kind of sitting on top of completely automated processes. And, I look at corporate America, I think in large swaths, there's a bit of the future in that model and in that vision. Like I said, it's not so much vision, it's what we were doing, 10, 15 years ago.
Right. I think that's right. I think there's a lot to be said for that. Depending on what the company is, I think, if you have those right profiles of the future, I just don't think they're wildly different than what they were in the past. But there'll be different spikes that are opportunities to hit on. But I do think even in that model you just talk about, where you have somebody who's running a big P&L, like massive amounts of support underneath with automation, agents, etc. I think the benefit, a lot of those folks' time is going to be spent in a strategic way. They're going to be thinking, what's the next rung of differentiation? What are the pieces? What are the customer insights that other folks aren't really understanding or tapping into yet? How do we iterate rapidly to explore those things? There will be that piece of just customer intuition and strategy that will have to creep in. And will still be a massive differentiators there. It's just you're going to have really strong foundations and how the rest of the business operates and works, and how you get leverage out of those things to be able to go differentially quickly, right? Like where you just completely can outrun everybody else because you know how to use the toolkit, you know how it fits in the broader ecosystem, and you know how to get to market really fast. So yeah, I think there's a lot in there. The spikes are going to change a little bit, maybe the things that are required and which ones are foundational, but yeah, I think the basic profiles, there's a lot of similarities to where they were 10 years ago or 15 years ago and where they'll be 10 or 15 years from now. What
do you think, looking back on your own career path, what did Groupon end up, was it the experience you needed? How did it help? Or, because certainly you were CMO of Amazon at the time. You could have stayed at Amazon and built a career there. Ultimately, what do you think it meant for your own career?
Yeah, I mean, it was incredible for me. I jokingly say all the time, like I have a lot of scar tissue from that stretch, and I'm really proud of it and happy to have it. Because one thing I know for certain, yes, I could have stayed at Amazon. I could have had a really good, long and I think, beneficial, valuable career at Amazon. I was flying pretty close to the sun there and was doing really cool stuff. And so I could have stayed, but I know for certain I wouldn't have been as happy. I like shaping the outer shell of things, and Amazon, even in those days, was a pretty well-shaped outer shell. And Groupon was not. Groupon was still like a wet ball of clay, and I really like that. And I think the challenges in that and building, and then in some cases having to tear things down, rebuild them, that pattern recognition is really hard to gain. And so I love having gained it. It definitely improved my communication abilities, because I had, especially as a public company CEO, I had to switch from being an internal communicator to a very different kind of external communicator, to a very different kind of stakeholder. I had to think about motivating folks across dozens of countries and thousands and thousands and thousands of people which requires a level of even strategic simplification and how you communicate that. That was just a great skill to build. Anyway, I love the time that I had there. It was brutal in lots of ways, a slog through the mud for a long time, but it definitely made me a better operator in every way. Mm-hmm. It allowed me to, more important than anything else, build amazing teams. And that's, over my stretch there, it's one of those, people can say whatever they want about Groupon success or failure. Just look at the number of Groupon alum that are running companies. Just my teams alone, people that I either brought on to my team, hired into the company, or otherwise. I think there's probably 16 or 17 that are running companies today, just from me. And so it was just, that stuff is so rare, to be able to build teams with that level of talent and to challenge them in ways to watch their career skyrocket. Like, that stuff is just incredible. And so I'm super thankful and feel really fortunate about my time there.
Advice for people who are on the CEO track, maybe in a big company today, things that they should be doing or could be thinking of that, were instrumental for you along the way?
Yeah. I guess one high level, and it's sort of generic, is just seek challenge. And part of, like I mentioned, Groupon was a hot mess. I knew it was going to be really hard. I knew it was going to be complex. And I wanted that, and I sought that out. And within that, I sought challenge that built a skill set that I thought would be valuable to be eventually someone who was going to run either that company or any company. And this, I should even say, I can remember I was probably in 7th or 8th grade and, getting in an argument with my dad about how I was saying he doesn't get it, at his company, complaining about his company constantly. And I'm like, you just don't get it, whatever. And at that point, I remember leaving that argument going, one day I'll show him. I'm like, I'm going to run companies like that. And so it goes back to, I wanted to be a CEO. I wanted to be an operator. And I had that in my mind for a long time. And so I always sought experiences that would challenge me and build the skills of what I thought a great CEO would bring to the table. And so I looked at that. I saw a big opportunity in that in Groupon, just the scale, the scope of it, the speed of it, the capital allocation challenges, which is a really big part of being a CEO, is allocating capital and resources. And so I sought those opportunities, and I was always willing to put myself in really uncomfortable situations in order to build those skills. And so I think that's when I look at my time at Groupon and just how formative it was on my career ramp. It just I sought that thing, and it delivered, of just providing the kinds of challenges and opportunities to build that set of skills and to demonstrate I could execute in those dimensions at a really high level. Mm-hmm. And so that's just that mindful approach and being very intentional is probably the single biggest thing I would give to people.
In my experience also, you're one of the most well-rounded people I know. I've seen you, your expertise in marketing is well known. Your expertise in capital markets and fundraising, your expertise in operations. I'm not sure a lot of people would know your expertise in product. And I think it's extremely rare for a CEO who's come up through the marketing path to be such a strong product guy. And I've often been impressed at your product knowledge. And, not to mention the teams you've built and Jeff Holden being a part of them and several other leaders there that are clearly the leading people in the world in their field and big important roles today in our tech world. How did you get that product knowledge? It's not obvious to me, and I think I've always wanted to ask you.
Yeah, that's great. It's a great question. I'm just a sucker for stuff like that. I mean, if I literally go back to one of my really early career experiences, and I was working for a sporting goods manufacturer, bicycle manufacturer, and I just with anything that I do, I try to become a student of it. And in particular, the product side of it, I'm just attracted to. Even in my personal life, building things is I love to do. And so I go back to that early stretch, and we were creating a very specific line, and I saw an opportunity to do something different. And so I moved the company into triathlon because I saw a market need, and I got to geek out in the back. And so I really liked that. And it started, I think my love for product started then. And I kind of was able to do the same thing virtually everywhere I've worked, especially the early stage companies that I've worked in. And then that actually translated into Amazon as well. And so we filed a bunch of patents. We built some really cool technology early on, especially for ad tech. That was way ahead of its time. And so I've always found an opportunity to tinker that way and build actual products. And so I'd never thought of it as that thing like the vocation that I would pursue, because it was like, for me, it was always a means to an end. Building that product was just a step on the path to getting it to market. And I spent most of my time really on the machinations of getting things to market, making them big and scaling them up and all that sort of fun stuff. But it was sort of like the bonus that I got to sit in the lab and build some things. And the same things happened at Amazon. I had opportunities I was originally brought in there to rebuild the go-to-market, the technology stack for go-to-market, everything from our keyword generators to our bidding systems and all that sort of stuff. But that stuff was all just, it was like in the workflow to delivering the outcomes on the business. Like I never got a call from Jeff Wilkie at Amazon saying, hey, Rich, can you speed up that product? I always got the call of, hey, Rich, can you turn up the heat on volume? Or can you increase our margin for the next 2 weeks? I got those phone calls. It was always the business outcomes. And that's what I ultimately gravitated toward, and it felt like a bonus to work on the product side. And I've kept that thread throughout my career, having a respect for the product and a joy for building them, and which it requires an investment in how to build them, the process for building good products, and connecting with customers and all that sort of stuff. And so most people just don't think of that when they think of my career, but it's been part and parcel to a lot of my success is what we actually built to enable the business outcomes.
100%. And I think for a lot of people who are perhaps in corporate environments, you might not feel like you have product levers.
Right.
And those might be totally new muscles. And I think a real benefit is, speaking personally, also a real benefit of working in technology is the product's usually always fungible. The product team is at the table. You do product reviews, you do roadmap reviews. You're often kind of up to your eyeballs in it. Like I said, for me, it's extremely rare a CEO who is just as much a product guy. And I love that about your background.
It's nice of you to say. And it's funny, I spend a lot of time with product folks even today. Mm-hmm. And one thing that I've seen universally in my time, and this is just my personal preference, like anytime I meet a product leader or a product manager that just wants to build cool stuff, I want to run the other direction as fast as I possibly can, because I've always looked at product folks that way, like product managers, as incredibly fungible and really the next. They should be next in line to be the next great GM, because the great ones are incredibly customer focused. Like they really care about the impact the products they make have on their end user. And they also are incredibly outcomes focused. They don't do things because they're cool. They do things because they meet a need and it's commercially viable, right? They're not researchers. They are product people. They're building commercial products. And I love those people. And I think there's frankly not enough of those. There's way too many shiny object builders and where they just build stuff because it seems cool. And you can see it, and we see it every day, like in our usage of all kinds of tools. We're like, why on earth would you build that stupid feature? It doesn't, you just wasted time and you still haven't fixed my login problem, right? And there's some of these things that I think the great product managers are so in tune with, because they're watching commercial outcomes, they're incredibly focused on customer feedback, and they're also incredibly focused on getting ahead of customers in a valuable way, which is all of that is that is a really, really good group of ingredients for the recipe of a big operator. That's a COO or a CEO, etc.
Rich, maybe wrapping it up, what is a question, if there is one, that I didn't ask that I should have?
It's a good question. I think that one of the things that's been on my mind lately that I've been hearing a lot about is, and you hit it tangentially, is that what do I think the CEO of the future will bring? And I, as people are thinking about their path to CEO, and I mentioned it a little bit on the technology side, like I think having some technical skills and being conversant technically is going to be really critical. I think one of the things we've seen historically is there's far fewer deeply technical CEOs out there. They exist, obviously, but there's just, as you look at the broad rank and file, even when you think about the entrepreneurial world that we've lived in for the last 30 or 40 years, it's always my technical co-founder. And I think that is something that I would encourage folks that are whatever, they're software engineers today and that are business minded and outcomes focused as well. And that's my favorite software engineers are in that zone. Mm-hmm. Those folks have a path to CEO that in some ways will probably be faster and more linear than the traditional I come from a finance and ops background. And so I think, just one thing on that side for people to keep in mind as they're pathing towards either starting their own companies, being CEOs, growing through companies, etc. I would encourage the emboldening of our technical leaders and our software engineers today to take that bigger step forward as organizational leaders and builders of companies, and not relegate to being the technical co-founder, which I just think is outmoded and outdated.
I think that's great advice, and particularly as we move into this sort of phase where the job security of software engineers isn't that great. If you're out there, building products currently and wondering what happens and will AI take your job, I think it does. Those are the folks that are going to be building the products, and if they can build companies, and much like your story, build product in order to have a company. And so if they have that mindset, maybe that is a path for them.
Yeah,
and we definitely do we're going to need a lot more founders with the way technology is headed.
100%. Those are, and I'm everybody's wired differently. I'm just not wired to be afraid of that stuff. And I've been very fortunate to work around people my whole career they look at bending the world to their will. Right. And seeing, and they're amazing at water finding the crack. Like they're just incredible at that. And they see that as a huge advantage. And I'm wired to think of it the same way. I know a lot of people are, especially in the engineering world, are watching how fast the tools are expanding and the capability sets are broadening. And we've talked about it. I've been mucking around with Replit a ton. It is incredible what you can do in that app in an hour. And I would, I can easily see why an engineer would start to feel like some existential crisis on that stuff. Whereas flip side for me is one of those oh my gosh, I am going to run circles around these people. This is going to be incredible, the advantage that a lot of software engineers have in being able to leverage the tool sets to the maximum extent. And it's really, I don't know, the business side of it, it's really not that complex. It really isn't. And I actually think, if anything, my time at Groupon underscored the most basic business principles of matching supply and demand. Mm-hmm. That business flattened out and started to dip when we lost sight of matching supply and demand, the most basic things. And so it's once we fixed those, within literally weeks, it had flipped. Mm-hmm. So that stuff is so simple. I don't know. I see such huge advantage for people if they embrace it and want to be the water that finds the crack. No one thinks of me as a product person, and yet it's so funny. So much of the stuff I'm the most proud of is the products we've actually, built. Totally.
And that's, like I said, and I've spent so much time with CMOs and, and I've been in that growth role, the CMO role, or had it reporting to me. And I just think there are so many marketers out there that have no idea on product.
Right. No, it's true. It's so true.
And probably that's why they stop where they stop,
That's right. No, they stop in that role and they'll never go. It's not, it's a totally good vocation. There's nothing wrong with it.
Right.
But I don't think you cannot do that, especially today. You can't not have, I would even argue, if you go run a company like Ford or Boeing, you have to be a product guy. It happens to be different kinds of products, but I don't believe you can be an accountant and run one of those companies. I don't think so. Right. I don't even think you can be credible in the public markets if you're just a financier who runs those kinds of companies. And I don't know. I think it's just it's a skill set that is undervalued for sure, or it's pigeonholed into, just like marketing, it's pigeonholed into a functional area, and people just stay in that functional area and they don't seek to go beyond it.
Yeah, 100%.
That's weird.
100%. Yeah, I wonder if you can even run a big CPA firm anymore and not be a product guy. How could you?
I don't think you can. I don't think you can just be that narrow anymore. Yeah. And you can probably do that shit with lifestyle businesses or whatever.
Right.
Whatever. You're running a $10 million business or something, services business, you can probably get away with it. But if you're going to run a large multinational, no way. And I'd even
Yeah.
Your company, you can't not be a product guy. Like you have to be a product guy.
You got to be a product guy.
It may not
all
be
the time.
the thing you're best at, but you have to have that skill.
Right. And, we didn't call it out explicitly, but it's the curiosity too.
100%.
I think that's the big part of it. Like you have to go into it. And it's just, you can be a company builder, but to be a good company builder, you've got to be curious about the different pieces that go into building a company. You can't just do your one thing, Oh, I'm a really good sales guy, so I'm a company builder. It's
right. No.
All the inputs need attention.
That's right. And I maybe at different stages of maturity, you can, I don't know, it's like the scales of justice, right? Like you can do one of these with them. You can change the amount of emphasis. You can change the time spent and the attention given. But you can't get out of the business of whatever it is. And if you're like, hey, I don't like dealing with HR problems. Then don't run companies because you're going to have to deal with them even when you have the best CHRO in the world.
Right.
So it's same deal. It's like if you don't want to work with product, you can't outsource that. At least I don't think so. You have to be engaged in it. You have to care about it. You have to be able to connect the dots strategically to it in ways that others can't. It is one of those deals.
I think there's a little bit in the national discourse now that I think people are, and it's both Trump and Musk have a quality that I recognize as a founder quality, and people's, opinion on that, one way or another, whether you like it or not. But I think it's the ability to have a thick skin around conflict. Like, I don't think you can build a company if you're not okay with conflict. And the ability to just prioritize kind of your different buckets of shit. Because every company has one. And it's like, there's some really terrible stuff. I got to deal with it immediately because it's regulatory. It's, we're not going to get licensed in this state if I don't deal with it right now or whatever.
Yeah.
And then the nagging, like here's some technical debt. Oh my God, it's really holding us back, but I'm not going to deal with it this quarter. And, I think all of us founders and CEOs, we just have we have our hierarchy of things, and our teams eventually learn that, right? They're eventually, I asked Rich about that, and, I realize he's not doing anything this year about it, you know?
Yeah.
But
I think that's right. I think that's so key. And it's funny, I don't even think about some of those attributes like curiosity or comfort with conflict. I literally don't even think about those unless they're pointed out, because I take them 100% for granted because they are universal in successful CEOs, and successful has lots of different versions of it, but lots of different meanings. But I don't know anyone that's actually functional in the CEO job that doesn't have total comfort with those things, and that aren't even, not just comfort with conflict, it's that curiosity is just, it is there. It's just in the DNA. And, after that, there's just so many other things, but those things they're just cost of entry.
They are.
At a high level, cost of entry.
Yeah.
It's not like just a sprinkling of each. It is cost of entry at a high level.
Otherwise you hate it. Otherwise you're never going to go to those meetings. That's never going to get pushed. Your team is going to start to avoid it. You're not going to hire the right people to run it. It's just,
No, how many CEOs have you ever met that don't love making decisions? Right? Fast. Like they just love it. And part of that is you can't do that. You can't love that without comfort with conflict, because I don't know how many decisions I've ever made that have made everybody happy. So it's just one of those, that stuff is just...
Right.
It's just DNA level stuff. And maybe you can be trained around, I'm sure you can build a certain amount of skill around some of those things.
Yeah. That's a great place to end it. All right. Excellent. Cool. Thanks again, Rich.
Oh, happy to do it. All right, man.
All right. Thanks for listening to this episode of CEO Tradecraft. If you got value from the conversation, share it with somebody who's building, leading, or scaling something. You can follow the show on YouTube and your favorite podcast app. And if you're a founder, operator, or investor with a story worth telling, I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, keep building.